Today we're tackling a story that it feels almost like a cyberpunk novel, but it's all too real. We're investigating a weapon that was so powerful it literally paralyzed the internet for millions of people.
And it really set this new, terrifying benchmark for what digital warfare could even look like.
We were talking about the autumn of 2016. It was this moment where it just felt like everything online was breaking down, especially if you were on the East Coast of the U.S.
Oh, yeah. I remember it vividly. You try to log into Netflix, maybe stream something on Spotify, check Twitter,
PayPal, even Slack for work.
all of it. And it was just gone. The digital highways were either completely clogged or just severed. It was chaos.
That right there, that was the Mirai moment. We saw these massive infrastructure attacks hitting DIN, which is a crucial DNS provider.
The phone book of the internet, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also the huge French web host, OVH. The culprit behind all of it was a Linux malware botnet known as Mirai. And the scale of what it could do was just, it was truly shocking.
And to put that scale into context for you, this wasn't just a bit of a traffic jam. The attacks were registering volumes that exceeded a terabit per second. That's 1 Tbps.
Which is a number that sounds big, but what does that actually mean in practice?
It means that almost overnight, a huge number of existing DDoS mitigation strategies just became obsolete. They simply weren't built to handle that kind of volume. Analysts at the time, they were struggling for words, for metaphors even. They described the OVH attack as the first thermonuclear bomb of the DDoS world.
A thermonuclear bomb.
That's how violently the goalposts moved in 2016.
And here's the absolute core paradox of this whole story. It's what makes it so fascinating and, frankly, kind of absurd.
Right.
This web-killing monster wasn't the creation of some hostile state actor, for military espionage. It was built by three young American citizens, Perez Jaha, Josiah White, and Dalton Norman.
And their motivation wasn't geopolitical. It was something so much more juvenile, I guess, but also surprisingly lucrative. It was all tied to a competitive Minecraft server scam.
Minecraft.
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up.
It is the ultimate example of a low-stakes crime yielding a high-impact, world-changing weapon. And for the record, the name Mirai, it's Japanese for future.
But not because they saw this as the future of warfare.
No,
Right?
not at all. They were just pop culture kids. They named it after an anime series from 2011 called Mirai Nikki.
So our mission today is a deep dive. We're going into the source material, the technical analysis, the FBI confessions, all of the legal fallout. We're going to unpack Mirai's technical anatomy, explore these bizarre monetization schemes tied to the Minecraft underworld, and then analyze the critical ongoing implications this whole saga has for IoT security and, maybe most importantly, for the U.S. judicial system.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking what kind of monster we're actually dealing with here. Before Mirai, the big famous botnets, I'm thinking Configure, Zeus, they all went after networks of compromised PCs and traditional servers.
Oh, the usual suspects.
So why did Mirai just skip the computers and go straight for, the smart fridge and the web camera? That is the crucial strategic shift that made Mirai so devastatingly successful. It completely pivoted its target base to the Internet of Things, or IoT devices.
And what does that mean exactly?
We're talking about devices that are running a form of embedded Linux. So your smart security cameras, digital video recorders, DVRs, home routers, baby monitors, even some connected appliances.
Yeah.
And these devices, they all share two really critical traits. One, they are absolutely ubiquitous. They're everywhere.
It too.
And two, maybe the most important part, they are profoundly, deeply, poorly secured.
So instead of trying to fight the, robust defenses on a few thousand PCs that have antivirus software and firewalls,
Yeah, much harder target.
they just weaponize hundreds of thousands of these little low power but high bandwidth consumer gadgets that are already sitting in homes and businesses all over the world. It's a classic asymmetric attack strategy.
It's precisely that. It weaponized negligence. At its absolute peak, the Mirai zombified network was estimated to include over 600,000 infected IoT devices.
600,000.
And all of these were being coordinated by somewhere around 484 distinct command and control servers. That's according to forensic analysis from late 2016.
Wow.
The sheer brilliance of it was this aggregation of offensive capability. All of it derived from this ocean of cheap consumer hardware. It proved, really beyond a shadow of doubt, that security failures in mass-produced, low-cost electronics are no longer just a local inconvenience for the owner.
They're a global security threat.
An immediate one, yes.
So that makes this security or, the lack of security on your neighbor's 10-year-old $40 web camera
Yeah.
a matter of national security in a way.
That's not an exaggeration. But even malware, this, well, genius, it rarely just appears out of thin air. It has an evolutionary history, a family tree. So where does Mirai fit in?
Right, it had to come from somewhere.
It definitely wasn't a spontaneous creation. Mirai is a direct evolution of earlier Linux threats. We can trace its lineage all the way back to some of the earliest DDoS-capable IoT malware, something like Linux.Hydra.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
And Hydra then gave rise to these other strains like Cybit, Chuck Norris, and Tsunami. These were kind of the first generation that really started targeting embedded Linux systems specifically.
So Tsunami and CypD, they sort of established the target, these IoT devices.
Mhm.
But what was the immediate predecessor that Mirai really built on, the one they looked at and said, we can do better?
That would be a piece of malware called Bashlight. It had other names too, Lizard Stressor, GAFGit. Bashlight was really the prevailing IoT malware of its time. And it was infamous for one thing, infecting Linux devices by brute forcing default credentials.
Just writing username admin, password admin over and over again.
Pretty much. But Mirai's architects, they looked at Bashlight and they saw a slow, inefficient dinosaur.
So how big was the leap in efficiency? Was it just a minor speed optimization or something more fundamental?
No, it was a complete strategic overhaul. Bashlight was really basic. It relied on a dictionary of just 6 generic usernames and maybe 14 passwords.
That's a tiny net to cast.
A very tiny net. Mirai, on the other hand, launched with a far more robust dictionary. We're talking 62 username and password pairs.
Okay, so a bigger list.
But not just bigger, smarter. And this is the key. The list wasn't generic. It was highly targeted. It included credential pairs that were specific to the most common consumer routers, IP cameras, and DVRs, the exact devices that were flooding the market at that time.
So they didn't just add more passwords, they added the right passwords, the ones tailored to this insecure IoT ecosystem.
Exactly. And then they married that much improved dictionary with a much faster stateless scanning module.
What does that mean, stateless?
Well, Bashlight used a more cumbersome stateful scanning method. It had to keep track of the connection state for every device it probed. Mirai streamlined that whole process. Its scanner just fired off probes and listened for responses without needing to maintain a connection table. This allowed it to identify and attack vulnerable devices way more efficiently.
And that combination, the speed and the targeted credentials, that's what fueled its insane growth rate.
That's the secret sauce. It's what enabled it to sweep up hundreds of thousands of devices in just a matter of days, not months.
And this is where the story pivots from this technical horror story into just bizarre criminality. Let's talk about the architects. Paris Jha, Josiah White, and Dalton Norman.
The 3 creators.
Right. These are young U.S. citizens who created a global weapon, but their whole operation reads like a high school prank that just escalated terrifyingly out of control.
Yeah.
So what was the division of labor between them?
Well, Paris Jha, who went by the alias Anna Senpai, he was the principal coder, he was the original author of Mirai, and he was a student at Rutgers University at the time.
Okay.
Josiah White was a key collaborator in the development and the day-to-day operations. But the real sophistication, the part that I think often gets overlooked, that came from Dalton Norman.
How so?
Because while Mirai is famous for brute forcing these default passwords, Norman provided the true surgical edge. He was the one who sourced and implemented actual zero-day exploits.
Wait, 0 days? As in vulnerabilities that the manufacturers themselves don't even know exist?
Exactly. And those 0 days were incorporated right alongside the basic password attacks.
But hold on, if they had access to zero-day exploits, which are incredibly valuable and really hard to get, why would they even waste time with basic brute forcing of, admin tweel 34? Wouldn't the 0 days have been enough?
That's a great question, and it really speaks to their strategy, which was all about volume versus precision.
Okay, explain that.
The 0 days gave them guaranteed access to very specific, highly vulnerable targets. That was their precision hit. But the brute force, using that big dictionary of 62 pairs, that gave them the sheer, unprecedented volume they needed to reach that terabit-level attack capacity.
So they needed both.
They needed both. They used the 0 days to secure a few initial high-value footholds, and then they used the dictionary list to ensure that exponential, scalable infection. They wanted speed and ubiquity.
And all of this staggering effort, this dual threat architecture, what was the grand goal? Were they trying to disrupt elections? financial markets.
Not even close. The core motivation, which was later confirmed by the FBI during the investigation, was purely competitive and financial, and it was focused entirely on the world of Minecraft servers.
I still can't get over that. Minecraft. The biggest infrastructure attack in history was basically over a digital Lego game.
That is the bitter, almost laughable truth at the heart of this story. Their main scheme was a classic protection racket.
How did it work?
They'd use Mirai to launch these massive DDoS attacks against rival Minecraft servers. They'd take their competitors offline, which would hurt their business, drive players away.
And then what? They just ride in to save the day.
Pretty much. They would then approach the victims or just the wider gaming community and operate this extortion scheme where they offered DDoS mitigation services through their own supposedly legitimate business. They were cornering the gaming server market by digitally breaking their rivals' knees.
That's one layer of monetization. But the financial haul from this was significant, far beyond what you'd think a Minecraft feud would typically generate.
Indeed. The bigger financial gain actually came from a secondary operation: online advertising click fraud.
Okay, so how does that work with a botnet?
They use the immense network capacity of the botnet to manipulate ad tracking data. They would make it seem like hundreds of thousands of real users were clicking on online ads, deceiving advertisers into paying for fake traffic.
And that paid well?
It paid very well. This operation yielded a pretty substantial compensation in crypto, totaling about 200 bitcoins. At the time of their arrest in early 2017, that was worth over $180,000. It just shows you how pragmatic and multi-layered their criminal enterprise was.
And here's where the moral audacity, it just becomes truly pronounced. We have to talk about the creation of ProTrav Solutions, LLC.
Ah, yes, ProTrav.
Jaiha and White co-founded this company, which specialized in, what else? Mitigating large-scale DDoS attacks.
They literally created the fire and then turned around and sold the fire truck. The irony is just profound. It moves beyond simple criminality into what is essentially high-level market manipulation.
They engineered and deployed the most destructive DDoS weapon on record, Mirai, while at the same time positioning themselves as experts in defending against it.
And think about the advantage that gives you. They possess this intimate, unparalleled insider knowledge of both the offensive capabilities they had just invented and the necessary countermeasures to stop them.
So they knew exactly how to build a weapon that was maximally disruptive. And they could make sure that weapon specifically targeted or overwhelmed the defenses offered by their competitors in the mitigation space.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like they were actively engineering demand for their own legitimate service by making all their competition look incompetent.
That's the chilling implication, and the timeline really supports it. They had a vested interest in making DDoS attacks exponentially worse. By releasing a weapon that could exceed 1 terabit per second, they instantly raised the floor for defense costs. They could knock out smaller competitors and create this lucrative new market for ProTrav, which, having designed the weapon, would be ideally positioned to be the only one who could counter it.
It's a predatory business model.
Absolutely. Using a weapon of mass digital destruction to enforce market dominance.
Okay, so the motives are clear: Bitcoin, competitive gaming, and this kind of twisted market sabotage. Let's move from the why to the how. How did a small group of young coders build something so technically efficient and scalable?
Well, it all starts with a highly optimized architecture and some very specific language choices that were tailored for the low-resource devices they were targeting.
What did that look like in practice?
The malicious content in Mirai was very logically structured. It usually resided in a root folder that contained all the necessary components for the virus, the command and control server, the loader, and all the scripts.
So walk us through the brain and the body of this botnet. What programming languages were they using, and why did they choose them?
Okay, so the agent component, that's the actual bot that lives on the infected IoT device that was written in C.
C, the classic low-level language.
It's the optimal choice here. C allows for direct interaction with the low-resource Linux operating system and the memory of these embedded systems. It ensures a minimal footprint and really high speed. It's lean and mean.
And the command center, the CNC server.
The command and control controller, that component was written in Go.
Google's language. Why Go?
Go is fantastic for handling concurrency, for speed, and for cross-platform compatibility. It made the CNC servers incredibly robust and capable of managing hundreds of thousands of simultaneous connections from all bots out there in the wild.
So we have this total system of 5 interconnected components then.
That's right. You had the virus itself, which contained the 10 different attack vectors we'll talk about. You had the command and control server, the Go component, which issued all the attack orders.
Right.
Then the bot agent, the C component, that lived on the infected device and actually executed those orders. Then a reporting server that logged all the successful brute force credentials.
And the last piece.
And finally, the loader server, which was responsible for pushing the malicious binary payload onto the newly compromised hosts. It was a complete coordinated infection suite.
Okay, let's focus on that initial entry point. We keep coming back to this dictionary of passwords. How did they actually apply that dictionary at scale? What was the core vulnerability they relied on?
The entire mechanism was predicated on exploiting the notoriously insecure Telnet protocol.
Telnet, that's been around forever.
It has. It typically runs on TCP ports 23 or 2323. And the reason they chose Telnet is because it was the default way that manufacturers provided remote maintenance access on these cheap devices. And crucially, Telnet transmits usernames and passwords in plain text.
So no encryption. It makes harvesting credentials trivial.
Completely trivial.
So walk me through it step by step. A brand new, vulnerable device comes online. What happens next?
The C-written scanner is continuously, relentlessly searching the entire IPv4 space for devices that are responding on those open Telnet ports.
Okay.
Once it identifies one, it doesn't wait for a human. It immediately begins a brute force attempt using that tailored dictionary of common username-password pair, defaults like root vis-a-vis or admin1234.
The ones people never change.
The ones people never change. Upon a successful login, the bot immediately secures those credentials and reports them back to the reporting server.
And that's when the loader server steps in.
Yes. The loader servers and their domain names were ingeniously resolved using Google's public DNS 8.8.8.8 to ensure reliability. They would then push the malicious binary, the Mirai agent, back to that compromised device.
And this is where that operational sophistication you mentioned kicks in, the self-cleaning feature.
Exactly. This is the part that shows they were thinking strategically.
Tell us about that.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about infecting a device, it's about securing it, holding that territory against competitors.
Precisely. The moment Mirai gained control of a device, it actively hunted down and destroyed its competition. It would identify any other competing malware that was already residing in the device's memory and forcibly remove it.
Wow.
This guaranteed its exclusive access to the device's resources. And furthermore, it would take steps to block remote administration ports, including the very same Telnet ports it used to get, essentially preventing other hackers, or critically, the device's owner trying to fix the problem, from gaining or regaining easy control.
It slammed the door shut behind it.
It secured its foothold with ruthless efficiency.
That explains the control. But the defining characteristic of Mirai was always its speed. How did this lead to that exponential growth you mentioned earlier?
It was just a perfect storm. The efficiency of the scanning module, the quality of that password dictionary, and the sheer overwhelming volume of vulnerable devices out there.
So what was the rate of infection?
Mirai doubled its size approximately every 76 minutes in its initial phase.
Every 76 minutes.
It infected over 65,000 devices in the first 20 hours alone. This astronomical growth rate meant that any mitigation efforts were always fighting yesterday's war. By the time security analysts even began to understand the scope of the problem, the network had already grown by another factor of 10.
We know the infection wasn't evenly distributed around the globe, which really highlights these global supply chain issues.
Absolutely. The highest concentrations of infected devices were found in Asia and South America. We're talking Taiwan, Brazil, Colombia, and China.
And why there specifically?
It just shows that the sheer volume of cheap, poorly secured hardware that's manufactured and deployed in those regions created the critical mass that was necessary for a global threat. Security negligence in Taipei directly contributed to a massive internet outage in New York.
The volume is horrifying, but the sheer power of Mirai also came from its versatility. Let's talk about this arsenal of 10 vectors.
Yeah.
Why did they bother to include so many different attack methodologies?
It was a strategic necessity, really. Anti-DDoS features are often designed to mitigate very specific types of traffic. SYN flood, for instance.
Right.
By incorporating 10 different vectors, Mirai could immediately pivot its attack if one method was being successfully filtered, ensuring it could maintain maximum disruption.
Okay, let's start with the most common ones, the TCP attacks, which rely on established connections.
The most basic was the SYN flood. This is where the bot sends the initial connection request, the SYN packet, but it never follows through with the acknowledgement, the ACK.
So it leaves the server hanging.
It overfills the target server's connection table, effectively creating a digital Mexican standoff where the server is just sitting there waiting for confirmations that are never going to arrive. They also used a standard ACK flood, but the really specialized one was TCP stomp.
How did TCP stomp differ from a basic flood?
TCP stomp was designed specifically to bypass more advanced anti-DDoS features. It bombards the target with a high volume of stomp that's simple text-oriented messaging protocol requests. This forces the server to expend its precious resources parsing all these non-standard requests.
So it's not just volume, it's complexity.
Exactly. It exploited the complex application layer interaction. It forced systems that were designed to handle simple connection-level filtering to waste all their processing power on deep packet inspection, which just rapidly exhausts the system's resources.
Okay, now let's move on to the connectionless protocol, UDP. Why are UDP floods so notoriously difficult to stop?
Well, because UDP, the user datagram protocol, it's sessionless. There's no handshake, there's no connection confirmation. The bot just fires junk data at the target.
You can't validate the source.
It makes basic source validation impossible. The target is just overwhelmed by raw, high-volume packets. Mirai did general UDP flooding, but it also did highly targeted ones. The VSE attack, which stands for Valve Source Engine, was explicitly designed to crash and overwhelm online gaming servers.
Which goes right back to their Minecraft motive.
Directly supports it, yeah.
And the DNS attacks. Those are the ones that hit DIN so hard.
Yes. The DNS attacks, sometimes called DNS water torture, they worked by flooding authoritative DNS servers with millions of random subdomain queries, often spoofing the source IP address.
So it's not just asking for google.com, it's asking for random string of characters.google.com.
Exactly. And the authoritative server is forced to process millions of these unique, complex lookups, which consumes critical resources and prevents legitimate traffic from being resolved.
You also mentioned two highly technical attacks that focused on obfuscation.
Yeah.
The GRE floods. Why would they use generic routing encapsulation?
GRE IP and GRE Ethernet floods were sophisticated because they used tunneling protocols. Essentially, they wrap junk data packets inside an outer GRE wrapper.
So they're disguising the traffic.
Precisely. It makes the traffic appear as normal, legitimate, encapsulated data on the network. For the defender, trying to identify and filter this jump traffic requires unwrapping the tunnel, which is a computationally expensive process.
Right.
And they often can't just block all GRE traffic because it's used legitimately by VPNs and other services.
It's a great way to sneak a massive amount of junk data past standard filters.
An excellent way.
And the final layer of complexity was at the application layer, the HTTP flooding.
That's probably the most resource-intensive attack for the botnet to launch, but it's highly effective against the victim. HTTP flooding involves the bot sending continuous high-volume HTTP POST or GET-YEET requests. It requires the bots to simulate legitimate user behavior.
So it looks like real users are visiting the site.
Right. And it consumes server-side resources like CPU and memory to generate dynamic pages or open and maintain connections. This requires a high level of understanding of the victim's server setup, which just confirms that the creators weren't just blindly throwing junk data, they were executing sophisticated, targeted denial of service attacks.
The technical capabilities are just undeniable. So now let's move into the actual impact, that timeline of public chaos in 2016 that forced the global security community to finally pay attention. Where did we see the first clear demonstration of Mirai's power?
The first major public strike was against the independent security journalist Brian Krebs, specifically his site, Krebs on Security. That was on September 20th, 2016.
And what happened?
It was a crippling 77-hour-long DDoS attack. It peaked at around 600 to 700 gigabits per second. The sheer relentless volume of it forced his content delivery network provider, Akamai, to actually withdraw their support.
They kicked him off.
They did. The cost of mitigating the attack was just too high for them to bear for a single client. He had to pivot his site over to Google's free Project Shield, which is generally reserved for political dissidents or journalists who are facing state-sponsored censorship.
So that was a warning shot. But the true new benchmark, the one that broke all the records, that came a few days earlier with the OVH attack.
Yes, the OVH attack was the real thermonuclear test. That's the one that peaked at over 1 Tbps.
A terabit.
And this wasn't just a hit on some small blog. OVH is a major global web host. They later revealed that the target was a single, undisclosed customer.
Which turned out to be.
Again, later reported to be a major Minecraft server operator. This just cemented the absurdity of the whole situation. The motives were trivial, but the weapon was existential.
And then came the really catastrophic failure on October 21st, the DIN attack. Why was hitting a DNS provider like DIN such a uniquely terrible outcome for everyone?
Because DIN was, and still is, a critical, centralized piece of the Internet's architecture. They provided managed DNS services, that phone book of the Internet we talked about, for countless major corporate clients.
So if you take down DIN,
You don't just take down one website. You take down the ability for millions of users to resolve the names of dozens of major services all at the same time. When Mirai hit DIN, it caused these cascading failures that took down Twitter, Amazon, Netflix, and just countless others, primarily across the U.S. East Coast.
this attack must have caused billions in economic loss. It paralyzed major commerce and communications. But you mentioned there's a crucial nuance here when it comes to the attribution.
This is the real shocker that was revealed in the forensics. Later analysis of the specific Mirai variant that was used against DIN, a variant known as Cluster 6, indicated that the major corporate websites that were affected were largely collateral damage.
Collateral damage, so they weren't the intended target.
It doesn't seem so. The primary focus of that CNC cluster, Cluster 6, was still the ongoing war between these rival gamers.
So you're telling me that the most critical infrastructure failure in recent memory, a global panic moment, was essentially just the fallout from a targeted, petty gaming feud that simply got way too big.
Precisely. The CNC cluster that was hitting DIN was simultaneously hitting dozens of smaller gaming-related targets. DIN was just a central point of failure that happened to serve both the gamers and the major enterprises. It's the ultimate statement on how a localized, commercially motivated cybercrime can instantly become a global systemic risk.
The international impact followed almost immediately after that. Mirai proved it could sever an entire nation's access to the internet.
The attack on Liberian telecom companies on November 1st was terrifying. It disrupted internet connectivity throughout the entire country by targeting the core infrastructure that managed the Africa coast to Europe's submarine cable, the ACE cable.
Wow.
The attack strength was estimated to be around 500 GBTs. This proved that Mirai could be used as this blunt instrument to disrupt connectivity at a national level, especially targeting countries that are reliant on a few pieces of concentrated cable infrastructure.
And finally, the Deutsche Telekom incident in Germany showed a new evolutionary milestone in Mirai's development.
Yeah, the Deutsche Telekom incident on November 30th demonstrated just how rapidly the source code was mutating out in the wild. This was an altered and actually buggy Mirai variant that targeted a specific vulnerability in the CPE WAN management protocol, or CWMP.
And what's that?
It's a protocol used to remotely manage consumer routers, like the Speedport and Zyxel models that Deutsche Telekom provided to its customers.
So this wasn't a brute force password attack. This was a specific exploit.
It was. This variant was scanning for all vulnerable devices that were exploiting the CWMP flaw, not just those with default passwords. And because the malware's code was faulty, the attempt to compromise nearly 1 million of these DT routers caused them to crash and then continuously reboot, which denied customers internet access even if the infection itself wasn't successfully completed.
So it was an involuntary denial of service caused by buggy malware.
Exactly, and it showcased the new risk posed by these more focused, exploit-based variants.
Okay, so the Mirai architects had created the weapon, they'd proven its destructive capability, and now they had a massive target on their backs from law enforcement all over the world. Their response to this intense scrutiny was, well, it was brilliant, if entirely ruthless.
Yeah.
The open source strategy.
Yes. On October 1st, 2016, Anna Senpai, Paris Cha, published Mirai's full source code. And not just the code, he included that lethal default credential list. And he posted it all on the notorious criminal forum, Hack Forums.
Why on earth did they do that? Why would they effectively give away the most powerful digital weapon ever created for free?
It was a calculated and incredibly sophisticated defensive strategy. It was designed to achieve one primary goal: deflect suspicion and muddy the investigative waters.
How would that work?
By open sourcing the code, they ensured that any subsequent Mirai attack, launched from anywhere in the world by anyone, would be untraceable back to them, the original authors. Law enforcement would suddenly be faced with a global pandemic of attacks, making individual attribution nearly impossible.
And that resulting pandemic was immediate and completely overwhelming.
Absolutely. The source code analysis shows that in the 5 months immediately following that leak, Mirai variants were responsible for over 15,194 documented DDoS attacks globally.
15,000.
The code was instantly commoditized. Anyone with rudimentary coding skills could now deploy a terabit-scale weapon. It really became the foundation of the modern DDoS as service economy that we see today.
And this legacy continues through constant mutation. Mirai didn't just die off, it evolved. What are some of the most concerning post-release variants we've seen?
The mutations show clear strategic pivots by different criminal groups. If you look at a variant called OMG from 2018, it went beyond just launching DDoS attacks.
What did it do?
OMG refined the botnet's capabilities and established itself as a ransomware as a service, or RAS, provider. It did this by turning the infected IoT devices into proxy servers, which were then sold on the dark web for anonymization purposes.
So they were monetizing the infrastructure for anonymity, not just for destruction.
Exactly, it's a different business model.
And what about variants that focused on new exploit techniques instead of just passwords?
We've seen a clear shift from brute force back toward exploit use. Variants like Satori, Okiru, Masuda, Pura Masuda, and Wicked, they all focused on exploiting specific zero-day or recently patched vulnerabilities in specific hardware.
For example?
Things like Huawei HG53D2 routers or a specific D-Link router vulnerability. This reflects the security community slowly getting better at patching the old telnet ports, which forced the criminals to find new, narrower entry points.
And this is still going on.
It is. Even as recently as 2021, a variant called ZH-Trap showed continued innovation. It used sophisticated honeypots to harvest additional IP addresses from other compromised devices, ensuring it had a constant stream of new victims.
Which brings us to the legal outcome, the part of this story that sparks the greatest ethical debate. The original architects, Jaha, White, and Norman, they were identified, they were arrested, and they pleaded guilty to federal charges, but their sentence was extraordinary given the scale of the damage they caused.
They were each sentenced to 5 years of probation and community service.
No prison time.
No prison time. This is the ultimate stunning paradox of the Mirai Confessions. The creators of a digital thermonuclear bomb walked free.
Why? Why did the U.S. judicial system allow this outcome despite the clear, quantifiable global damage? What was the mitigating factor that was powerful enough to offset the sheer scale of their crime?
The single critical mitigating factor was cooperation. The source material confirms that they provided extensive, critical technical assistance to the U.S. government on other complex, sensitive cybersecurity investigations.
That was a trade.
This wasn't a standard plea deal. It was a high-level strategic decision by federal authorities. The government made the cold calculus that leveraging their unparalleled, specialized technical skill and their insider knowledge was infinitely more valuable to national security than achieving some symbolic retribution through incarceration.
So they traded their technical knowledge for their freedom. And this sets a really provocative legal precedent, doesn't it? It suggests that technical utility can outweigh criminal accountability if your skills are rare enough.
It absolutely does. It forces us to ask whether we, as a society, view high-end hackers primarily as criminals who must be deterred, or as resources that can be strategically utilized against even larger threats.
And the controversy here is that this outcome might actually incentivize other highly skilled young coders to commit massive crimes, knowing that their specialized knowledge could be their ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card.
It's a huge moral hazard.
And the disparity is highlighted even more when you contrast their outcome with that of the people who merely use the open source code they released.
The contrast is just stark. Take the case of Daniel K., who went by the alias Best Buy. He was a user of a Mirai variant. K used the code to attack Deutsche Telekom, which we discussed, and he also attempted to blackmail major UK banks like Lloyds and Barclays.
And what happened to him?
K was arrested, he was extradited to Germany, and he received a custodial sentence. He went to prison.
So the architects who built the weapon received probation, but the user who deployed it for extortion went to jail.
That's the disparity. The architect's actions enabled the very proliferation that ultimately caused greater legal peril for the code's deployers than for themselves.
Okay, so Mirai exposed this foundational fragility of the internet, rooted in all this cheap hardware. If Mirai was a collective failure of vendor security, what were the immediate, non-negotiable requirements that were forced onto manufacturers after 2016?
The key lesson was the over-reliance on those insecure default credentials accessible via Telnet. So the mitigation requirements are really just fundamental security best practices that should have been there all along.
Like what?
First and foremost, eliminate default credentials. Devices should require a unique, strong password to be set up immediately upon activation. This prevents the construction of those credential main lists that fueled Mirai's growth.
And what about maintaining security over the life of the device? Because IoT devices are often installed once and then completely forgotten about.
That's why mandatory auto-patching is essential. Since these set-and-forget devices are almost never manually updated by the consumer, vendors have to ensure that critical security patches are pushed out automatically. Without this, known vulnerabilities, like the one that crashed those 900,000 Deutsche Telekom routers, they just persist indefinitely.
And on the hardware side?
On the hardware side, manufacturers must implement rate limiting on login attempts. This physically prevents the kind of rapid-fire brute force attacks that Mirai specialized in. 3 wrong guesses and you're locked out for 5 minutes. Simple stuff.
Moving beyond the physical devices themselves, the response also had to come from the network layer. ISPs were struggling because all these infected devices were hidden behind network address translation, or NAT.
That was a huge roadblock for them. NAT bundles dozens of devices behind a single public IPv4 address.
So the ISP can see the attack traffic.
They can detect the flood, yes, but they can't accurately trace which of the, say, 50 devices in a customer's home is actually the infected Mirai bot. It's like seeing smoke come from a building, but not knowing which apartment is on fire.
Which brings us to a strategic imperative that predates Mirai but was really accelerated by it. The mass migration to IPv6.
Exactly. We have to accelerate the migration to IPv6. The IPv6 protocol eliminates the need for NAT because every single device connected to the internet can have its own globally unique, publicly routable address.
Which makes tracing much easier.
Massively simplifies it. It makes tracing the specific infected endpoint for mitigation efforts much, much easier. US IPv6 adoption was growing at the time. It was around 35% in 2017, but the scale of Mirai showed that this migration is now a security mandate, not just an architectural preference.
So if they can't eliminate the attack source fast enough, how do ISPs filter the malicious traffic itself at the network core?
They have to rely on advanced network filtering techniques. A critical tool for this is BGP FlowSpec.
How does that work?
It allows ISPs to dynamically distribute filtering rules right onto their edge routers almost instantly. If they detect a massive flood that has a specific, easily identifiable characteristic, say it's using a specific combination of port numbers, they can use FlowSpec to block that traffic dynamically based on its 5-tuple values right at the router level before it ever reaches the mitigation center.
And what about specifically addressing those massive UDP floods that Mirai launched?
For that, they utilize unicast RPF, or reverse path forwarding. This is a technique that's used to validate the source IP address of incoming traffic.
Okay.
So if a packet arrives on an interface claiming to be from an IP address that the router knows is actually unreachable through that interface, RPF just drops the packet. It's highly effective against the spoofed source IPs that are often used in these massive UDP floods.
The Mirai architects also used modern obfuscation techniques, like hiding their CNC servers. How is the industry fighting those future tactics?
The defense is pivoting more and more toward intelligence and automation. We're seeing heavy investment in machine learning, or ML, to automate the detection of domain generation algorithms, DGAs.
Oh, what are those?
Modern malware uses DGAs to generate thousands of random domain names every day to hide their CNC servers, making manual tracking impossible. ML can identify the algorithmic patterns in these domain names almost instantly.
And for encrypted traffic.
They're inspecting malicious SSL certificates via Deep Packet Inspection, DPI, to generate unique SHA-1 fingerprints for encrypted CNC traffic. There are projects like the SSL Blacklist that are dedicated to sharing this intelligence.
And finally, to contain the damage when a device inevitably does get compromised, network isolation seems like the key.
It's the ultimate containment strategy. Network isolation and microsegmentation. The goal is simply to ensure that a compromised IoT device cannot communicate with unauthorized endpoints. If your smart camera gets infected, it should only be able to communicate with its manufacturer's cloud service, not launch a massive SYN flood against DIN.
So you're building digital walls around every device.
Exactly. Technologies like the network slicing feature being built into 5G networks are designed to enforce this kind of separation, to confine the blast radius of any future botnet infection.
But all of these defense strategies, they rely on global cooperation. Since most of this botnet traffic originates outside the US, how do we enforce these standards across international borders?
That is the persistent challenge of jurisdiction in cybersecurity. The technical solution requires better collaboration mechanisms, specifically encouraging network operators to include pre-negotiated provisions for traffic filtering in their transit and peering agreements.
So a contract that says, if you see an attack from my network, you have permission to block it.
In essence, yes. If Network A detects a flood originating from Network B, they need a contractually mandated ability to request filtering at Network B's source, close to the bots themselves.
And are there any key initiatives that are working on this kind of real-time threat signaling?
There are a couple of important ones. DOTS, which stands for DDoS Open Threat Signaling, is an emerging standard protocol designed to let networks exchange DDoS-related telemetry and mitigation requests automatically and in real time.
Okay.
And then there's M3AAWG, the Messaging Malware Mobile Anti-Abuse Working Group. It's a coalition that focuses on anonymously sharing the source IP addresses of attacks to help network operators clean up malicious traffic sources as close to the origin as possible, often involving coordination between otherwise competing ISPs. Hashtag outro outro.
So the Mirai confessions revealed a really terrible truth. The stability of our entire global infrastructure is dependent on the collective security of the cheapest, most widely distributed components, the IoT devices in your home.
It was the perfect low-cost, high-volume weapon, and it's what catapulted the world into the terabit era of cyber attacks. We're still living in that era.
And the absurdity of the motive, this high-stakes Minecraft feud that was fueled by click fraud, is indelible.
It proved that great destructive power does not require state-level resources or some sophisticated geopolitical intent. It only requires pervasive, accessible vulnerabilities. And years on, the core failure remains. The economic incentives for manufacturers to prioritize cost over security are still dominant, which basically guarantees that new generations of Mirai-like threats will continue to emerge.
And that leaves us with the central, unsettling tension of this whole story. The three young men who built the most powerful digital weapon of their time were rewarded with probation in exchange for their knowledge. They effectively traded their technical skills for legal immunity.
So what does this unprecedented legal precedent signal about the true value and the danger of technical skill in this age of cyber warfare? And what does it say about our ability to genuinely deter the next Anna Senpai, knowing that utility might always trump accountability? You really have to wonder if the U.S. government's decision to prioritize their specialized knowledge has inadvertently guaranteed the creation of the next catastrophe.